So, recording my thoughts for my team to type up this response to the national task force that has been set up by Supreme Court. There are about 15 items in here. The task force is looking to sort of get the ideas, suggestions, and putting the solution together. So, based on my expertise and what I know, I'm going to get into one bullet item at a time and type up this. My team will type this document, and then we will go back and forth, yeah, till we finalize it and ship it out. So the first item here is make recommendations on augmenting the available supplies of oxygen based on present and projected demands likely during the pandemic. So this is more hitting on the production side of the house. That's my understanding. Yeah, based recommendation augmenting the available supplies. So the basically, if there is a supply constraint, what are the possible action items or steps have to be taken to improve the production or the quantity of production, that's quantity of oxygen that's available, so the production capacity augmenting. So I think on this regard I don't have much to add because I don't have visibility into where all oxygen is being produced, in what quantity. My exposure and visibility is more around based on the allocations that have been made to UP especially, and to the other states that we have been researching on, and how do you distribute it as quickly as possible from there on, based on the projected existing demands as well as the possibly projected demands of the immediate future. That's the body of work that we have done, and I think we are going to rely on it to make some best guesses on the other issues that Supreme Court has asked here. And the first submission on how to augment, what I can say is you should look at each and every available avenue to produce oxygen. The best case scenario would be to make it produce as locally to the consumption area as possible. But I know, given the current scenario, that might not be possible to immediately scale the production capacity in each region, in each sub-region and micro-region. And so the major hubs where oxygen is being produced and is being shipped all across India have to be leveraged and maximized for that purpose, for this purpose. And that will of course put pressure on how quickly can you supply from those points to the points of consumption. So we'll come to that part later. But in terms of augmenting the capacity, every available production plant that can be procured or put together should be leveraged. There should be a national level policy, but the implementation and identifying the possibility of where the plant should be, and looking at best ways possible to put the plant together at the ground level in a localized manner. I think that decision making should be left to the local authorities. But the guidelines and the structures has to be at the national level. Now, since this is a national level crisis, you can't decentralize so much that you lose the control at the center level. Otherwise, you'll have lopsided effect of some areas will get well served and some others will not be. The second issue that will kick in here is the wealth gap of various states, the size and the muscle power that the states have to procure and deploy and develop these production capacities. And that's where I think the center has to come in and look at the states that are handicapped in one way or the other and help them to ride over this crisis. The states that are large enough, that have been industrialized enough, I think they might be able to do a much better job of augmenting the capacity, and they should definitely do it on their own. But then if they have extra capacities available, they should definitely sort of lease it out to the center, and then center should distribute it based on the needs and requirements, understanding of the smaller or less handicapped state. What are the possible technologies available out in the market? I don't have the list on top of my head, but I'm sure there's an oxygen producing expert committee that can identify what all technologies are available, how can they be put together, how they can sort of be help to reach the interiors and the areas that need the technology the most, and then sort of get it implemented there. Once we start to put our head on the production side of the house, we might be able to come up with a solution. But as of now, most of body of work we have done is on the supply efficiency and the demand projection. So that's where I'll limit my comments to. The second point that Supreme Court is looking for is on the formulate and devise the methodology for the allocation of medical oxygen to the states and UTs on a scientific, rational, and equitable basis. Now, this is a loaded sort of a comment. One of our biggest issues has been to be able to absolutely project what is the real demand, and we have struggled that within UP. But in UP, at least, there is a mechanism in place where most of the medical colleges, they project their demand. Now you can say that demand might not be accurate, there might be leakages, there might be sort of not the efficient use of the oxygen that they have, and you can discount all those things. But let's say you assume that the demand is even 50% accurate. The oxygen audit that was done recently by IIT Kanpur at least gave a number which is like 15 liter per person and so on and so forth. If you take all those into account, at least you reach a reasonable guess of what the demand curve is, or the slope of that curve is for each state. And within the state, you have to go granular by districts, and hopefully even within the district, the sub-districts, because this whole pandemic or contagion, whatever you want to call it, it's not going to be consistent all across the India at the same time. It's going to ebb and flow from region to region, peak and trough, based on various conditions and situations. Could be socioeconomic, could be geographical, could be weather pattern, or whatever the case may be. I think the medical community might be better at judging it. So I would let those guys figure out. But the way we have dealt with that problem in UP is, the first was to make sure that whatever your allocated quota is, you lift that and supply it to the various centers or the hotspots, and make sure that they are flooded with oxygen, and at least you calm the what I call the demand spike as much as you could. UP has done that very successfully, and my recommendation would be for the other states to do the same. Of course, it took a week and a half worth of very intense effort to organize every asset that had to be organized to lift and shift this oxygen, and I think the other states will have to do the same. In terms of formulating and devising the methodology for allocation, it depends. The methodology has to consider the granularity of the demand curve by region, by sub-region, put it together, project it, and then look at, I'm sure there are various sampling methodologies and statistical tools available to look at the rate of growth of contagion or rate of containment. And based on that, you dynamically, sort of allocate and disallocate. I would make it a 24-hour cycle and not let these allocation, or maybe supply chain will get, disturbed, a 24-hour cycle, or at least 48 to, whatever 60-hour basis, that you take the assessment of how the contagion or the pandemic is spreading in a certain region and whatnot, and then you reallocate based on which areas are spiking up and which areas are calming down. So the areas that are calming down, you should have the flexibility and nimbleness in your methodology, that you shift the oxygen from the calmed areas to the hotspots. And don't make it a hard and fast rule that whatever has been allocated, it becomes a God's verdict on a stone. Keep the nimbleness and flexibility enough. I hope all the stakeholders come together to understand the gravity that it's a national crisis, and they can be a little magnanimous in letting their oxygen supplies that might be either going to waste or might be underutilized to the other states that might be hitting the hotspots. So on that point, that would be my submission. I'm not, I can work with few statisticians and methodology experts to help them to crank this out, but right now where we are busy and what we are focusing on is that the projecting the demand is definitely not something that we have worked very extensively on, because it requires tremendous amount of past data, existing data, number crunching, and come up with the analytics, which is 20-30%, whatever your confidence factor in it, to be able to drive accordingly. This will require a bit of work, let me put it this way. Make recommendations. The next one, make recommendation on augmenting the available supplies of oxygen based on presented projected demands likely during the make recommendations on augmenting the available supplies of oxygen based on present and projected demands likely during the pandemic. I think this point probably falls off from the previous two. This is also looking to do a demand projection. And I said it's not a hard and fast demand projection that, like grains, that so many people will eat so much food in so much years, so you flood the grains. This is going to ebb and flow based on how controlled it is in certain areas and how aggressively spreading in the other space. And then you will have to dynamically, and this is going to be the challenge of this entire exercise, is how do you dynamically allocate and disallocate and shift your supply chains to constantly be able to stay ahead of the curve, on the demand curve, and shift the supplies wherever the hotspots start to bubble up. Good news is these hotspots don't show up overnight. There's a pattern to it. So if you can start to observe the pattern and dynamically allocate and shift your supply lines, you will be able to address it. The next one, make recommendations for the periodical review and revision of allocations based on the stage and impact of the pandemic. This is exactly what I said earlier. This falls off onto the demand projections, demand management, and realigning your supply lines to wherever the demands are starting to heat up, and sort of shut down from the areas that have calmed down. Now, even the areas that are calmed down, they're not going to go to zero, but the only thing that's going to happen is their demand will fall, and the dynamically reallocating those supply lines from those areas to hot areas would be the art and science of it. This should, as I said, every 48 to 60 hours, all the stakeholders need to sit together and, based on the evidence, based on the data, make the decisions to shift the supply lines. Facilitate audits by subgroups within each state and UT inter alia for determining. Absolutely agree to it, because being a large country, massive requirements, you have to micromanage oxygen, which is right now the most critical asset, and you have to have the committees and subcommittees up and down the chain of command to be able to very objectively look at the data and make the recommendations. Whether the supplies allocated by the union government reach the concerned UT and state, which I'm sure all the state officials and the DMs and the SDMs in each state might be able to submit the report, or at least flag up, which they have been doing in UP very effectively. How certain oxygen is, whatever oxygen has been committed to them on the night before, how effectively it's reaching there. The technology the RODIC has deployed in UP has been very, very effective to sort of track it, manage it, and the transparency that it has brought into the system is remarkable. Accountability in regard to the utilization of supplies of oxygen allocated to each state UP. Now, this subject gets a little tricky, because now you are getting into the medical expert area. For each hospital, whatever their protocols are of using oxygen, which patient they are giving, how much, at what pressure point, how many beds are there in each facility. And the audit that was done in IIT Kanpur, I think it will help quite a bit to be able to see how many COVID beds are there in certain districts. So what is the sort of minimum oxygen quantity that they'll need to be able to serve those beds, considering the worst case scenario that all the beds are full with COVID patients. So that way you can do the reverse, from the back door, the demand projection. Now, whether that oxygen is being utilized properly or not, I think that has to be consulted to the medical community, whatever their SOPs are, whatever the best practices are, and how they're using it. So it might require a little bit of a softer approach to educating them. I'm not saying they're not educated, but just the better use of oxygen, that SOP has to be developed and relooked at. Plan and adopt remedial measures for ensuring preparedness to meet present and future emergencies which may arise during the pandemic. Now, this is definitely what I call, scenario planning and scenario assessment. It should definitely be done, and my, submission on this point is that you have to look at the worst case scenario. So whatever your current positivity rates are, the country's, hospitalization rates are, recovery rates are, the drugs that are available. There are many factors that are going to impact it. The first thing is whatever the international best practices that have been adopted and developed in UK, US, and the other countries that have some sort of gotten a good handle on this pandemic. Those SOPs and procedures needs to be internalized as quickly as possible. Look at the ways of how to use those ASAP in our situation, because this this coronavirus has pretty much the same consistent behavior across the globe with a minor, you know, tweak in terms of or minor variation in terms of the morph the morphing that's taking place. But at least 80 to 90% of the same international best practices that have been used in US, UK, and the other areas probably will be effective here. So that could be your starting point. And then as that point starts to emerge and you get more granular data based on the adoption of those SOPs, you can further fine tune and fine tune, tweak the possible, you know, scenario, possible strategies to contain the pandemic if, in case it gets worse. But you have to plan for the worst. Start with the, you know, getting the right SOPs and methodologies from the successful areas that people have developed. Integrate it, deploy it, and then learn out of it, and then constantly tweak it. What I call agile way of, you know, responding to an emergency. You're not going to get 100% result on the very first hit, but get a baseline set up and then continue to improve it 1 degree at a time, and hopefully you'll reach what I call baby step to perfection. Rather than trying to spend a lot of time and trying to create a perfect scenario, start with whatever you have, fix it as you go along, and have the intellectual depth and governance flexibility to be able to make quick decisions towards perfection. The next one, review and suggest measures necessary for ensuring the availability of essential drugs and medicine. I think this falls into the probably the area where whoever has a good stock of whatever the national level, whatever the best SOPs are going to be to kind of contain this contagion and the pandemic, to whatever the protocols are for drugs and medications perspective, it falls with the previous point. Once you know your number that you are targeting, that might be the worst case scenario, what all drugs and medicines do you need to address it, and then work backwards to make sure you procure them from international markets, produce in India, whatever the case may be, park them in various centers across India so they can be quickly deployed and distributed as and when it happens. Facilitate the use of technology to ensure that the available manpower is optimized for implementing innovative solutions, particularly in order to provide an outreach of expert medical care to rural areas. Now, this is a, you know, the body of work that we have been doing here in UP, but primarily our expertise and our focus has been to lift and shift the oxygen as transparently, as openly, as quickly, and with as effectiveness as possible to the hotspots. We have achieved significant amount of success. We will attach our, you know, solution and paper in response to this, right, as an addendum here. The application is up and running. It can be scaled to countrywide and provided. And I think we should scale it countrywide because it will give you a unified platform to be able to manage the oxygen, which is the most critical asset right now, have transparent visibility into its production, into its movement, the containers, the ships, the airs, whatever assets you're using, and that will itself will provide a great data set to make quick and nimble decisions. That's exactly what we have seen in UP. So we will attach a detailed presentation of our technology innovation that we have achieved in UP, and how it has been deployed, the efficacy of it, benefits of it, and so on and so forth. Suggest measures to augment the available of trained doctors, nurses, and paramedical staff, including by the creation of suitable incentives. This definitely taps into that. Whatever assets you have, whether as a current, retired, expert, whoever wants to chip in, create a nationwide database of all the available, doctors, nurses, paramedics, and move them around the country based on wherever is the most requirement. I think we have to get our head out of being regional and command and control. There has to be certain amount of regional flexibility and empowerment that has to happen, but with the sense of that it's all being coordinated and sort of collaborated with the center, which is keeping an eye on the nationwide issue of this pandemic. Promote evidence-based research to enhance effective response to the pandemic. Definitely, support that. But the idea, evidence-based research requires tons of data, and you have to put data gathering, automated data gathering infrastructure in as fast as possible across the country. We can definitely help here. We have a lot of ideas and suggestions, and we will add some solutions on the back of this. facilitate the sharing of best practices across the nation. Totally agree with it. I would recommend every 12 hour a sort of a conference with all the respective parties, whatever the best that they have done, the outcomes that they are achieving based on their interventions, they should be shared. The other parties in various regions can start to either adopt them or at least make a call what will work for them. And this definitely should be done in person, at least in the early stages, because it does take a time to either type it up and share it. My other idea is always record a vlog and keep posting it on a portal, and portal can become the sort of best practice sharing sort of an ecosystem. We can extend it as part of our platform, and I think that is highly recommended as well. Generally, to make recommendations regard to other issues of pressing national concern to find effective response to the pandemic. Uh, this is beyond my sort of capacity to think about, but I'm sure there are a whole lot of issues that are going to emerge out of it. My feeling is that this shock to not just to India, but to the world at large is going to have much wider, broader, and deeper repercussions, just like 9/11 in US and 2008 financial crisis there, and some of those severe calamities and shocks that in India might have faced in the past. But at a national level, I don't think anything of this magnitude has hit India since 47. So there has to be larger, broader, and deeper, sort of understanding of the scenarios that will evolve post-pandemic in India that has to be sort of considered and looked into. And that's where I would sort of leave my comments on it. I'll continue to think deeply about each one of these subjects, but I just wanted to get the paper started with my team. We'll circulate the draft today, and then as and when we get feedback on various points, we'll further keep refining it. It's going to be a living document for a while, and I think that's how we're going to approach it. We're going to take a lot of inputs and keep beefing up our platform and system to bring the technology-based backbone to address most of these things that Supreme Court has asked here. I've been thinking about various features we might have to add and grow this platform into, and we will start to roll that out. Thank you. Bye.